Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Educate, enlighten, and entertain. And today, on Lest We Forget, we are going to talk about prostitution in the Old West. I will start it off, followed by Lisa Skinner. Betsy's internet has dropped and she will join us when she can. So what did I find out about the Old West and prostitution? You should know, ladies and gentlemen, that right off the bat, prostitution was considered good for the economy. The Old West cities and towns needed this evil, quote unquote, by the church because it helped fuel their economy. And without them, these towns and cities would not have made it. Just food for thought. Okay, I did some research, and I've got to tell you, my eyes were opened and I was blown away. The first thing you have to know is that there's a pecking order for prostitutes, and that there are different types of names for prostitutes, but more or less they mean the same thing. The first question you'll ask is, why was the rise of prostitution in the Old West? Well, first of all, it was mostly men who went out west. Women were shot if they wore a pair of pants. It was against the law. Know that. Second of all, when the men go out there, as they say in the military, men have needs. Not quite sure where that leaves us, but men have needs. And even though some of them were respectably married, the majority of them were not. And so they put out advertisements. Yes, the majority were looking for brides, but a lot of these ladies were, well, they were ditched by men who told them they loved them. They had affairs with them, but they were not married. So they're already in trouble. Or they gave birth and they had to give the child away, but their reputation was lost. Or they may have been married, but their husband did not put money away for when he died. So all of a sudden she had kids to take care of. Or she had to take care of mom and dad who themselves were not well off. And prostitution was the only job available for these ladies. We're talking about the 1850s, ladies and gentlemen. There were not many jobs outside of laundry workers. Or you can become indentured as a servant and scrub houses for pennies. So what is the pecking order for prostitutes? If you were a mistress, that meant you only did one-on-one. You didn't have anybody else to worry about. And that client took rather good care of you. And then you had the courtesan, which meant that you had a small group of men who took care of you. And you took care of them. But they're still whores. They were still prostitutes. And there were different types of houses that they went to. The best house to go to were the parlors. These were for upper class women. Basically, they were beautiful, not necessarily thin like Twiggy, but they had curves so their clothing could drape and you could tell the difference between their bust, waist, stomach, and hips, which apparently were very important. And they were well clothed, well fed, and yes, some of them were very well educated. And they lived in the better parts of the city, of the town. So that was top dollar. Then you had, and they, oh yes, $20 to $30 a head. kind of sounds like cattle, doesn't it? Anyway, $20 or $30 for each man that came in and were entertained by these ladies. The next step was the brothels. They weren't so clean. The ladies maybe weren't so pretty, but they weren't worn out. Their body hasn't been used all that much, so they could command a price of $25 to $35, depending if the man was willing to pay them. The rooms were still clean and respectable, but they did not have a lot of accessories or creature comforts. But they were maybe a step down from the parlors. And then after that, the next step were the cribs. And these were for the ladies who were all used up. They plied their trade standing in front of windows. And they display portions of their bodies to lure in people. But I only got paid literally pennies on the dollar. During the 1850s to the early 1900s, human trafficking raged in San Francisco based on the Chinese tongues who bought young girls from Chinese peasants or women who did not want a girl around. In China, girls were considered worthless. If they were not exposed to the gods on a hillside, they were sold to feed the family. Sound familiar? That's exactly what they did. And these ladies worked from 25 cents to $1.50. And they entertain a lot of men. And then there are the ones who are homeless, or they were addicted to drugs. The most infamous opioid out there was opium for the Chinese, and laudanum, which was a form of opium. And usually these were the ladies who took it to escape their life, because a lot of them didn't live that long. The ages for prostitutes were 14 years to 24 years. And if alcohol and drugs didn't get them, syphilis did. There was no form of approved birth control, nor could you avoid getting pregnant. There were a lot of people there who told you to use different metal objects to thrust up to destroy the fetus or destroy the baby. And of course, nothing was sterilized, so the infection alone would kill you. And then you have the streetwalkers who were either pimped out by men or ladies and girls who were homeless. And they would sell themselves for anything that they could get. You're wondering how prostitution became known as the red light district? This I didn't know. When engineers from the railroad came out to have sex, they would leave their red lanterns outside of the room or the shack or wherever they were doing their sexual thing. So if there was an emergency on the railroad, they would be known to be found by those red lanterns. And that's how it got to be known as the red light district. Now, in the mining camps, the women came to be laundry, so it can clean up their clothes with lye. That's made with the ashes from the chimney. It's pretty strong stuff. I've made it when I was living off the land. Trust me, you don't want to use it because it'd be burning everything you put in the water with it. Then you have ladies who were notorious prostitutes, but some of them became outlaws to supplement their income. Things you never knew because this was not taught in school. But you have to understand that prostitution is the oldest job for a woman to take. In England, if something happened to your husband and he wasn't wealthy, you landed up in the streets and you became a prostitute because that was the only thing, the only job that would pay for you to take care of your family. Trust me, the church did not care. They didn't run homeless shelters. They didn't feed the hungry. And if you were a girl, trust me, the good old King Harry would not take you in and educate you and feed you. That was only for boys. Girls did not rate except to be used. You were considered property, even in the Old West. Listen to some of the dialogue and the cowboy shows and the movies that were made, and listen to how they scripted those words. You're mine. You belong to me. You do as you're told. Think about it, ladies. Okay, I think I covered everything. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Skinner.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being with us today. Hey, I just want to piggyback on a couple of things that Lillian shared with us, because what she was explaining and defining prostitution kind of reminded me about slavery. And even though they weren't really technically prostitutes, they were expected to service their masters. And it started on the slave ships when they were being brought over here from Africa to be sold into slavery when they reached the United States. So the first men that got to enjoy their services were actually the crew of the slave ships. And then once they were sold off to their masters, they became concubine and were expected to service their masters. And there were many mixed race children born as a result of the masters taking advantage of their slaves. But unfortunately and sadly, they couldn't do a darn thing about it. So it happened. It was shameful, but it is a very strong part of our history. And it kind of relates back to the same period of time that Lillian is referring to, because this was all going on in the Old West prior to 1865, when the Civil War ended and the slaves were officially freed. Now, I found an article that was written by a student. Her name's Melody Pruitt, and she wrote this piece for her sociology class at Ouachita Baptist University in 2018. It's entitled "The Social Implications of Prostitution." And I stumbled onto this article, and it was actually a class paper that was brought to us online for free. We were given, anybody can look it up, open access by the Department of Sociology at this university. The name of the article is "The Social Implications of Prostitution." And I found it really fascinating and a completely different perspective about prostitution that I thought would be really interesting to share with everybody. So let me read highlights of the article for you. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but these are, I think, the highlights and the main points of what Melody was trying to get across through this paper. Prostitution, as we all know, is regarded as the exchange of some kind of sexual service for money. In the United States alone, prostitutes serve approximately 1.5 million customers a week. Those are the current figures, or at least they were as of 2018 when she wrote the paper. It is a historical profession that has lasted with high demand for hundreds of years. The movements such as the Me Too movement have brought to light the sheer prevalence of sexual assault in American society. Women's rights are very popular today. Sex trafficking and slavery are at an all-time high, and societies are beginning to acknowledge that this really is a serious problem. It is interesting, though, that issues such as reproductive rights or sexual assault are constantly trending in the media and in everyday conversations amongst people, but prostitution typically is not talked about. Prostitution, though, can have just as devastating consequences to both women and society as a whole. The greatest debate within our literature appears to be whether or not prostitution should be legalized. Different authors have distinct opinions on the consequences of either legalizing or prohibiting prostitution. There doesn't really seem to be a middle ground to that. It's one or the other. Some argue that prostitution should be completely abolished due to its nature of exploitation and objectification of women. Some believe that prostitution is just another method by which men assert their dominance over women, like they're slaves. Therefore, in the modern era, it should be eliminated according to evolving ideas of gender equality. Others view prostitution as the means by which women are actually empowered, that women have the right to choose what they want to do with their bodies, including selling them. To restrict this freedom through legislation would be to oppress women and further promote inequality between the genders. Although the literature may vary slightly between the two camps, these arguments appear to be the general divide. Either way, it appears that many agree that prostitution is rooted in further social issues such as gender equality and women's rights to own their own bodies. There is also differing opinions on whether prostitution is actually harmful. Some assert that prostitution is a victimless institution in which both parties involved mutually benefit from the transaction. Others argue for its harmlessness by saying prostitution is analogous to casual sex. And since casual sex is not viewed as harmful by society anymore, then neither should prostitution be. The sentiment that since prostitutes make a fair profit for their services, then the methods of doing it so can't be inherently popular or inherently harmful. Many often promote that since a prostitute signed up for this job, then she inherently consents to whatever sexual act she participates in. Therefore, since the sex act is consensual, it cannot possibly be harmful. In other words, just because a sex worker might consent to and be paid for sex does not mean that prostitution is inherently harmless. I wonder if Stormy Daniels would agree with that. Obviously, the debate surrounding the issues of prostitution has significant economic undertones. Many proponents of prostitution view it as simply a business transaction like any other merchant-customer relationship. A prostitute is commonly viewed as just another laborer in a capitalist society. She does not sell herself, but sells her services just like any other merchant would. Although within society, prostitution is viewed as an unacceptable institution, it has significant economic ties to the society as a whole. Lillian talked about that. Prostitution is an economic relationship at its most basic level. So particularly in a capitalist society, it obviously ties into the entire economic system. However, although prostitution has significant economic underpinnings, it is not purely the consequence of economic factors. It has been a key institution in varying societies for hundreds of years. It actually dates back all the way to the Middle Ages. Typically, there are no social consequences of prostitution for the client. One argument to the issue of prostitution is that sex workers suffer no real loss from selling their bodies, but actually gain quite a lot. Many ignorantly believe that the general income of prostitutes is higher than any other service level job. Lillian discussed the several tiers of prostitution, and guess what? They still exist today. Anywhere from your streetwalkers to your very high end, and I believe they call them call girls today.
Escort services.
Escort services, that's right. Thank you for clarifying that. And they are alive and well and probably booming in business, wouldn't you say, Lillian?
Yes, they're doing a very good job. And one of the reasons why they never got rid of the prostitutes in the Old West was because of the corruption and because a lot of high-level politicians, mayors, governors, police, they're all involved.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They have their little
even the church members. Look at every cult, ladies and gentlemen, and see what the cult fathers do every single time. They separate the husband and the wives, and they go after the wives, and they have sex with them every single time.
And the children.
And the children. Doesn't matter what cult you go to.
Yeah.
And these are people. Go ahead, sorry.
That's okay. Not only do women suffer numerous psychological and physical issues when engaging in prostitution, but they also lose their social capital. A woman or girl's choice to prostitute herself then comes with a significant moral decision of whether she wants to be labeled as socially unfit or deviant for the rest of her life, while the clients face no such decision. And based on what Lillian shared with us, this dates back all the way through time, this deviant reputation or label, I should say. In societies where prostitution is legal, it falls into a distinct category of crime. One party, the client, is seen as a law-abiding citizen, while the other party, the prostitute, is seen as the deviant. Prostitution has been stigmatized as a form of antisocial behavior. There has been much support in feminist and liberal camps for declassifying prostitution as a form of deviance. Instead, the emphasis is being placed on prostitutes as workers or wage laborers. They too are simply trying to make ends meet just as any other person in the working class world. Prostitutes choose to work in this field, so their actions truly cannot be classified as deviant. That's an interesting perspective. Prostitution has been argued to actually reduce deviance within a society because it minimizes the risk of rape and different forms of sexual assault for other women. I think that's probably true, even though rape and sexual assault.
It's a very brutal profession. They get beaten up, they get raped, they get sodomized. I think that it invites gentlemen to do their worst and no one will know.
And according to this gal's paper, the research that she found out was that, yes, that's all true what Lillian is saying, and we all know that to be true. But because of prostitution, it's lowering the risk of the rest of us out there, because they do have prostitutes to utilize instead for those purposes. But as we all know, rape is not necessarily a sexual act. It's an act of power over women. So that's why we will probably continue to see it, all women victims of rape and sexual assault. There are many internal and external factors that lead one to prostitution. And the problem with prostitution is not only the selling of sex, but the sexism that supports it. That hasn't changed in thousands of years. Men have utilized prostitution for hundreds of years to assert their dominance over women, and this helps affirm a male-dominated society. Now, in our lifetime, we have seen huge inroads to making changes in that, but are we where we want to be? Not even close. This ignorant thinking is epitomized in the thoughts of Irving Singer, who claims that there is nothing in the nature of sexuality as such that necessarily reduces persons to things. Because, as he argues, there is something fundamentally reciprocal to sex. The fact of the matter is, prostitution does not promote a pleasurable exchange between two consenting adults. Instead, it is fundamentally the unilateral use of a woman's body by a man in exchange for money, period. The prostitute, much like the sex slave or the young girl who experiences sexual assault, epitomizes male-dominated society. Prostitution is an avenue in which men can continue to assert dominance over women without any strings attached, or really without any social consequences. Even the term prostitute has slowly evolved into the term sex worker, not to destigmatize prostitutes themselves, but as a way to create a non-judgmental atmosphere to be able to solicit clients. I guess they think it sounds better. It exhibits this misogynistic idea of the male sex right, meaning that men are entitled to women's bodies simply because women are seen as subordinate. What do you think of that one?
Well, it's true.
Huh?
It's true up until the 20th, even in the 20th century, if a person came in and saw a man beating up a woman and interfered, they would be told it's his right as the husband, that she's my property and I can do with her as I wish. The Bible says so.
And I think that behavior was happening in the 50s and the 60s.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I have the right to beat my child.
In the 70s.
Yeah.
But for not very long.
Very long. And the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, I believe one of the Germanic countries, I think it was Sweden or Switzerland, did legalize prostitution, but they also took care of the ladies. They gave them clean housing. They gave them a doctor with medical standards that they had adhered to. They had to go and be examined for syphilis or gonorrhea. And they also had to stop when they were pregnant. And they were pretty much monitored by the government. Now, whether they're still doing it or not, I don't know. But I do know that they took away the stigmatism of living in rat-infested 23 beds in one room, uncleanliness, no protection against the diseases that men pass, because men have no idea except maybe AIDS, and you have read about where men in the 80s and 90s very gladly passed along the fact that they were active with their diseases plus AIDS and didn't think anything about passing it along to the woman who would then pass it along to other clients. So it kind of makes you wonder. It can be used as a weapon.
That's a really good point, Lillian. According to Melody's research, she says essentially prostitution allows for public acknowledgement of the man being the dominant actor in society, an affirmation of men as sexual masters. There is certainly a double standard in society when it comes to sex workers. It can be said that a crime such as rape could also be categorized similarly, with one party, the victim, being a normal, law-abiding citizen and the other party being the sexually deviant criminal. The question becomes then, why is the prostitute the one that's seen as deviant in one scenario and the rape victim seen as not when they both experience traumatic sexual events? Certainly, the argument can be made for choice, where the prostitute chooses to be in that situation, therefore making her deviant, while the victim definitely did not choose to be in that position. That begs the question, though, of whether prostitution is actually chosen. I think in some situations it is, and in some situations it clearly is not. It's due to circumstances. Prostitution is certainly a very real and prevalent issue in today's society. The problem with how society regards prostitution today is that it separates it from other institutions that demean women and widen the gender gap. It seems that society views sex trafficking, unequal pay, and sexual assault, among others, as serious women's issues, but prostitution does not appear to make that cut. Even further, as seen in some of the literature, some members of society even believe that prostitution empowers women and allows them to make a profit while working in the field of their choice. It has been discussed in the literature that multiple factors led women into prostitution or lead women into prostitution, including sexual assault experienced as a child, poor economic conditions, drug abuse, and others. Perhaps some women truly make a conscious choice with no other external push factor to sell their bodies. I think they're probably the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
But it is certainly ignorant to apply that generalization to every sex worker. So my call to action, based on what both Lillian and I have shared with you today, you let us know what you think about these two camps and anything that Lillian shared with us on the topic of prostitution. What stand do you take on it? Do you think, do you agree with the deviance theory? Do you agree with women make their own choice? Any of the points that we approached you with based on this topic, we would love to hear how you feel about it. You can email me at my personal email and share your comments at dementiawhisperer1@gmail.com. And Lillian?
You can approach me at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com, or you can text your comment to 484-364-1032. To wrap up, the month of International Women's Month and to honor those women who have made a difference, next week, Friday at 3 p.m., we will discuss some of the risks and perils that women face and trying to bring a change in our current society. It can be ladies who were for the suffragette movement. It can be women who try to make a difference in getting slaves out of the States into Canada. It can be women who have taken a turn and decided how they would help their fellow women. Also, next Friday at the same time, I will be interviewing a lady, Dr. Tracy Kempler. She wrote a book about narcissism, and she's written how to protect yourself and what to look out for when encountering a narcissistic person so that you will not be abused the way she was. When you're involved with a narcissistic person, it basically means that person is only concerned with one person, themselves.
I am so excited about her being here. She is an expert on sexual abuse, and I can't wait for her to share some of her experiences with us on some of these victims that she has counseled. So make sure you join us next Friday for that exciting episode.
Absolutely. And if you want to be a part of it, we will be live again next Friday at 3 on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and on LinkedIn. So please join us then. You can speak to us with the comment section or text us or email us, and we will make sure we pick it up before we go away. Now, there is one thing, food for thought. In Texas, when I was raising my child, and this was the 80s, thank you very much, I was offered by a cattleman who was quite wealthy to take my 9-year-old son and take him to his madam in a sophisticated, well-to-do parlor so that she can show my son how to give a lady, or girls his own age, I guess it's more appropriate, how to have a good time in bed. And if you think that's not still happening, you're just ignorant, because there are a lot of cattlemen and wealthy gentlemen who arrange for their sons to be tutored by these ladies of the evening so that when they finally go out and have that one encompassing I'm a man thing, they know what they're doing. My question is that like learning how to order the right wine or malt whiskey for when they take out the girl too? Think about it.
This actually was a common practice in the days where premarital sex was a big no-no.
Yeah.
So fathers did introduce their sons to prostitutes so they could learn how to have sex when
how
they
to
got
pleasure a woman. That's what the Japanese, sorry to say, that's what it's all about. When my son went through the American Field Service back in the 90s, he went to Japan one summer, he went to Thailand one summer, and the only way he managed not to be taken to the two countries' brothels was to say, I promised my mom I will remain a virgin until I get married. And since wives and mothers are esteemed, they did not force his hand. But if he had not said that, you better believe they would have taken him to the brothel. And in Thailand, that's with a 12-year-old or a 9-year-old girl.
Yeah.
So think about that. It's important that you think about this. And our call to action is, how would you make a difference if you had the opportunity to stop this practice? What would you do? Or I met a lady who owns an organization called She's Someone's Daughter. Someone else, she is someone's daughter.org. Go look them up. They work with girls and women who have been sold for the white slavery trafficking abroad to servicemen. So go look them up. And I'll be interviewing her April 4th, 11 o'clock a.m. Stay tuned. Thank you all very much for joining us. And until next week, have a great week.
Bye, everybody.